Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Shudi. How are you doing today?
Morning, guys. Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good
I know
morning,
it's a
everyone.
Morning.
good morning. I know it's a public holiday, so thank you so much for taking the time to join this conversation. So we will just get started, and I think at the moment we have a little over 50 people joining us on from LinkedIn. So today's conversation essentially will border around the impact of the ongoing Iran Israel crisis on the real estate market across Africa. They say that when two elephants are fighting, um, the surrounding bush usually suffers for it. Even though that war is happening, miles and miles away from us, we are feeling the impact in construction, we are feeling the impact in real estate transactions, we are feeling the impact in real estate services. And essentially, that's what today's conversation is gonna be around. So thank you again for joining us. So we just dive right into it. Are we good?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So Mr. Tokwe, thank you for joining in. I'd like to start with you. Take us back to say end of 2025. Um, from a construction standpoint, how has the market shifted, and what are you seeing to be like the impact of the war since the beginning of the year on the construction sector in terms of projects moving to site, cost volatilities, and what has really changed? Again, thank you so much for joining us
So,
this morning.
um, thank you, Martin. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I didn't hear the first part of your question properly. Do you mind repeating the first part
Yeah, I was
of your
saying take
question
us
again,
back to
please?
2020, the end of 2025. What has changed between
Right.
late 2025 and 2026 in terms of projects moving to site, cost changes in the market, and what that means for construction activity in general?
All right. Very well. Thank you. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, the end of 2025, first of all, building up to um, throughout the year 2025, I think the construction sector had a little bit of stability relative to prior couple of years. And what that meant was that we could come to the era where we could now give some level of predictability to our clients in terms of costing and quotations and cost of execution of projects. However, as the Iran-Israel war started, even before we started seeing the direct effect, the
Mm,
first thing that happened was a lot of agitation in the market from clients and from stakeholders. And it wasn't too long before the effects became visible. And we started seeing uh, increase in the price of iron rods, started seeing increase obviously in the price of cement. Then, of course, labor costs also started going up because cost of transport, cost of feeding, all of that. And we're entering another era where a lot of unpredictability comes into our activities. And the last time, well, I mean, it's not as extreme as after the unification of the foreign exchange and removal of swap subsidies. Not as extreme as that. However, there's a lot of agitation. We get questions every day. And between December and now, I can say that we've experienced about a 20% increase in construction cost already, just as a result of whatever is going on and the effects of the macroeconomics on our cost of construction.
Okay, interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of us on this call and those joining us can allude to some of the things that you are saying, even those that are not at the forefront of, construction. They are not handling any ongoing construction activity directly. We can begin to feel some of this impact in diesel costs, in running our home, in transportation costs to move to the office, and stuff, and all of that. So the impact of some of these things you are sharing, I believe a lot of people on this call can relate to it. So, Mr. Ake, I'll just circle back to you. And I think it's very important that we're having this conversation because of the kind of people we have on this room. On one end, Mr. Topper, you build the supply in the market. Mr. Akin, you essentially sell that supply, and Shude is essentially running a platform that that makes sure all of the essays that are built, all of the projects that are delivered are being run. So this conversation is very important because it runs really across every segment of the market. And Mr. Akin, like I said, I'd like to just circle back to you a bit. From a transaction standpoint, how has the market changed since the beginning of the year? And I'd like you to attribute to some of the disruptions that this ongoing crisis has caused from a transaction standpoint. Are you seeing more transactions happening? Is it slowing down? And what can you think, or what do you think the war is having on the market in terms of impact?
Okay, thank you. And to the audience, good morning, everyone. Happy holidays. Okay, so very lovely topic. Happy to be able to share some thoughts. So for me, I think it's quite unfortunate what has happened, the turn of events. So it's like a war that has taken place. Africa has no hand in it. We have no boots on the ground. But of course, as Dotum has said, is reprising every construction project, every development budget, and the decisions in the country, and of course in the larger continent. For me personally, I run a professional real estate services company. So personally, I feel that the war has made the luxury real estate market more expensive. We've seen dollar price rentals and sales. It has drastically gone up. Then at the bottom of the pyramid, of course, the affordable social housing segment has even been more unaffordable. So conversations around the what is the housing shortage? Of course, it will even take us much longer to achieve that. So from a transaction standpoint, I think last year was quite good. We could see it from the IMF, World Bank, GDP figures was looking quite up. We thought we could consolidate that this year, but most of the African countries, even in Europe, those foreign institutions have pegged down those growth forecasts because of the ongoing war. We've seen transactions definitely slowed down from a rental and from a sales standpoint. And also, Martin, you did touch on it at the very beginning of your comment. And I like the way you paired this panelists. So we have investor market, development market, and operators market. And I think all of us play there effectively. So from the supply end, we've seen developers really struggle. And let me also lay some context. So this is not just the conversation from the war, which I believe started around June last year. When the president took over in 2023, we started to see those policies, yes, in the right direction for the long term, but of course, short-term measures high inflation, cutting across high labor cost, high material cost in terms of construction. We all know 60-70% of imported materials are being used for the housing construction industry. So inflation-wise, we saw it play out in the rental market, especially those on the island, VI, Koi, Oniru, Banana Island, Eco Atlantic axis. And of course, even on the mainland too, we've seen percentages from 15 to 35%. We've seen a lot of landlords and investors try to hedge by trying to dollarize their own investments and their own products, just so that they don't lose from exactly. Yes, from that standpoint. So transactions have definitely slowed down. But for us, I personally believe is not just from an impact from the war. It started off from those reforms from the federal government. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think Nigeria has gone through multiple phases of economic shock. Devaluations, rebasing of the naira, the impact of the policies you spoke about. Obviously, the short-term impacts are not good. Quite a number of them have long-term potential, but the short-term impacts are not good. Removal of fuel subsidy. So there's been layers and layers and layers of shock on the market, from the real estate standpoint, from the construction standpoint, even down to individuals just living across the country. And I think one of the strongest impact, like you mentioned, is transactions slowing down, because transaction essentially is a function of people's purchasing power, obviously, which has already been significantly impacted by some of these policies and economic shocks. And on the construction side, Mr. Tokpe already mentioned rising cost of construction, which obviously will unpack that a bit, but I can begin to imagine that some of the direct impact will be longer delivery timeline for projects. Some of the impact of that might be some conceived projects taking longer to move to site, and some of those things. And I know we are still going to unpack that, but the bottom line from what I've heard from both of you is the war, layered with the economic shock that we've seen over the past, will I say 24 months, is having some negative impact on the market from a services standpoint, transactions and construction standpoint. Mr. Shude, I'd like to hear your thoughts around how this is impacting the people using your platform. You essentially have built a platform where all of the supply that is built in the market is being run. How has this impacted, this particular crisis we are talking about, how has it impacted, the facility management side of, of the market from, your platform perspective? How are people dealing with, increasing energy costs? How are people dealing with, just the general rising cost of, running estates? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So thanks, Martin. Really great question. Maybe to help put it in context a bit. So at Venco, we build the operating system on which many of the communities, especially residential, in the country run. So we have a vantage point, or a view of the market from an operational perspective, because the costs of running the communities are usually directly billed through our platform, whether it's the service charges or the utilities payments. And what I'd like to say is that in the past, and maybe even currently, running these communities has always had an FX exposure angle to it. Which is that in the end, a lot of, from the materials used to build the place to the inputs used to run, specifically, diesel, and fuel costs, a lot of them have been dollar linked. But what we are seeing now is that there's a geopolitics exposure, to it as well, which is, I think, maybe something novel. I'm not sure. Well, since I've been in the business, we have never seen a situation where a war in Ukraine or a war elsewhere or a conflict elsewhere has had such a direct impact. So this is, they say you learn something new every day. So this is a new thing that we are now starting to see. And here the impact is not so much in exchange rates as in the actual cost of things, because the cost of things, that are, imported, many of which are affected by, as we call it at Venco, the Strait of Hormuz problem. So we don't actually think about it as a US-Iran issue, but the
Yeah.
specifically the Strait of Hormuz, challenge. So what has really changed with respect to this new, event is that where there was a bit more predictability, not perfect, but a bit more predictability in terms of the cost and the budgeting around running a community in the past. Now that's a bit all over the place, and the reason is again largely around energy costs. Where diesel is one of the major inputs. Into the cost of running a community. So as we all know, many communities augment the energy that they get from the grid with backup power generation that they have, in the communities. And it's been very hard to budget for the cost of diesel. So for example, a year ago, a liter of diesel may have been, 1,200, 1,300. Now we're approaching 2,000. And depending on how this conflict goes, we may get into the 2,500 naira per liter realm, which would be quite challenging, frankly, for many of the communities that we serve, because what that translates to is per kilowatt energy costs of north of 700 naira per kilowatt hour. That is enough to cause conflict and revolution in many of the communities, that we serve. Yeah, so definitely that's what has changed. The lack of predictability, the fact that the budgets that, many facilities managers had put in place, coming into the year have already been blown, and there's no clarity as to where, those costs will settle. So I would say that energy is really the main thing that has changed, and that has a ripple effect, of course, on cost of living for even the service providers in those communities. So it's that predictability and that inability to forecast, within a reasonable set of boundaries, what the cost of living, specifically energy and other services, will be.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that, and I'd like you to double click on what you said a bit. So I remember very clearly at the beginning of the year, I think diesel was 1,200. If I'm not mistaken, it was around 1,200. Now it's approaching. In fact, if you are buying, depending on who you are buying from, it's some people are already selling at 2,000, and some slightly above 2,000. And obviously, to implement some of these changes in cost and pass it down to the end user is usually not as straightforward. So my question is, how have you been able to manage that chaos? Because when you are planning, we are planning, and some people have paid energy charges upfront. Some people have paid service charge till the end of the year. You projected it to be around the 1,300 region. Now it's over 2,000. It's closer to 2,000, whatever the case is, depending on where you're buying from. How have you been able to contain that chaos? And what are your perspective on the reaction on of the market from a demand standpoint if this continues?
Okay, so because we are not the direct providers of the services, we just manage the platform on there. What we have been able to see is that, of course, there's already some pushback in terms of these costs. Yeah, so our role is to help our customers to better manage this pushback, and better communicate with the audience. One of the challenges that we know that is rife in our space is the quality of communication. So the situation is what it is. Everybody knows and is actually feeling the impact, be it in their own direct jobs, in the cost of other things that they do outside the community and all of that. But I think that the major thing or differentiator that many of those in the operation space, the facilities management space can do is to communicate better with numbers, with data, around what's going on. These are the costs. Here is a model that shows that, at this price, this was what we were paying. At this new price, this is what was, what the cost will be. Sometimes all it takes is just to be able to be clear and straightforward in what is happening. If you are not able to confront that and get ahead of that messaging, then you become a victim of it. Because what will then happen is that people will respond to the shock, and they will respond against the first person they see. And the most proximal person to that whole situation is the facility manager, right? So getting ahead of it, being able to communicate upfront, and perhaps brainstorming with your audience and your customers on what the way forward would be, can usually help to manage the situation in many cases. Most people are reasonable if given enough information around it. Of course, it's a time for innovation. It's a time to think outside the box. So we are seeing all sorts of strategies being put in place, from rationing, backup power, working out arrangements with grid suppliers to kind of have better hours, as well as looking at alternative energy sources, right, as a way to manage the situation. So for example, by that I mean things like gas, still dollar indexed, but maybe not as affected as diesel, in the situation. And also, one of the things that we are trying to push, the jury is out still on whether we are going to be able to coordinate ourselves as communities, is that many communities are clustered, close to each other. And it's a pity that they are not taking advantage, and maybe this situation will help them do that. They're not taking advantage of the economies of scale that they could. Exactly. So why not share amenities? Why not cluster 5, 10 communities close by and do a deal with the gas power, energy provider, to kind of break down your costs. So these are some of the innovative thinking and thoughts and strategies that we are hoping will come out of this situation. So out of every bad situation, I think that there's the opportunity to, apply novel thinking to create stuff that is really impactful.
Thank you, Shude. And it's interesting that you mentioned that. Mr. Tokwe, how are you managing this current environment with your ongoing and new projects? You probably priced a bunch of projects with the assumption that petrol price, for example, will stay around a certain figure, and now that number has doubled. You are mid-project. That extra cost is on you. From your perspective, how are you managing this environment for your ongoing construction projects, and even for what are the learnings for new deals coming in?
So there are two angles. There's the situation that is already ongoing, and then there's what are we going to do about what is to come. In terms of what is ongoing is also in two categories. From the last 3 years, we stopped signing fixed contracts. That are absolutely fixed. So we've come up with several variations of what a fixed contract will look like, ranging from fixing it to the extent of the amounts that you're able to give me per time. So I'll give an example. So I have some set of contracts where, let's say the contract is 10 billion, and you tell me as a client that I can afford to give you 2 billion. So we'll calculate where the value of 2 billion will get to on the project, and agree that to the extent of this 2 billion that you have given me, the contract is fixed. At that moment, we set baseline prices. So the market is open, the day you're giving me that money, cement is X amount, reinforcement is X amount, diesel is X amount, petrol is X amount, and that forms a baseline. And there's a timeline that is given for us to get to the target of the milestone given. So when we hit that target, we'll check the indices that we used at the beginning and see if there has been any major shifts. If there has been, we adjust accordingly the next phase. So it's almost like fixed phase by phase. The entire contract can no longer be fixed, but it can be fixed on a phase by phase basis. And so we re-examine all the indices and determine if there has been any major shifts, and then we make an adjustment. That is a strategy that has worked. Of course, the natural disposition of the developer or of the client is to say, oh, I already have my finance locked in, it's fixed, I don't want it to change. But more and more clients and developers are finding that if I want this project to finish and to finish well, we need to have a conversation, because if you were to say, oh, the term is being unreasonable, let me leave him and go elsewhere, you're going to meet either the same or worse, because for every new contract that gets priced, a new contractor is going to reprice with some buffers put in place for possible escalations. So you find that it becomes more reasonable for you to have a conversation with the guy that is already on site. So that is with existing ongoing projects, when there's an escalation, like I said, in the last 3 years, we have stopped signing full fixed contracts, turnkey from beginning to the end, except you're going to give me 100% of the money the day we sign the contract. If you're going to do that, I can fix the contract for you. Of course, then I go internally to make all the necessary moves I need to make that possible. So I do a lot of advanced procurements. If it's a complete turnkey where there are major finishing items that need to be imported, I make payments for those and secure them so that my exposure is also capped. Of course, there are things you can't procure in advance. For example, I cannot procure concrete in advance, even if I paid Lafarge all the money. When there's change in cement price, they will send me a letter to say we have to adjust, right? So there are certain things, no matter how much money you have, that cannot be fixed today, because they also don't know what is going to happen. So really, it has called for a lot of creativity, a lot of reasonability, and it has also put me in a position where I've become selective with clients, because if a client has a propensity to be unreasonable, I'd rather not get in it, because I know that it's going to end in stress. And we have come to a point where we want to do business, but we want to limit the amount of headache and stress that comes with that as much as possible, because we're already in an environment that is stressful. So you don't want to add to that by dealing with an unreasonable client, So we are even taking a step back to actually, now I look at the character of the person that I'm dealing with. These are soft issues, has nothing to do with price or anything, but it has nothing to do with the project. But if you are not going to be reasonable, I'd rather just leave your project alone. Look, another one will come. And I found, where we propose all these measures to clients on the basis of our experience, right? And the client many times goes ahead to do it the way they want to do it. I've found that those projects always suffer, not because I'm special or we're special, but we know something. We have been doing this for a while. So it's either you go somewhere else and they tell you the same thing I'm telling you, or you go somewhere else to someone who is desperate and tells you what you want to hear, and you're going to end up in one of two situations. Either you end up with a substandard project or the project gets stuck. That's just so when you find that that's the situation, you come back into the room and have a conversation.
So it's quite interesting that you mentioned that, and which leads me to the next thoughts I had in mind. I know quite a number of developments in Lagos that were sold off plan, but the developers are struggling and struggling to execute. They are even struggling to even return the money back to to the people. You have quite a solid strategy around how you know how you go about your project contracting and everything, but we have situations where developer took money, sometimes the entire money, from a client 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and 3 years, 2 years down the line, they are not able to deliver because the market has just shifted unreasonably that it's impossible for them to deliver. For people in that kind of situation, what are your perspective?
So again, I spoke about reasonability. And when, for me as a contractor, my client is the developer. For the developer, his clients are his subscribers. So he needs to have the conversation that I'm having with him, with his
With his
subscribers. We all need to jointly be reasonable and come to a position. So for a developer, I would say you need to have those conversations if the prices has moved in very clear terms and you can show that you have judiciously. What happens is that trust has become fractured because some people have actually abused people's trust. So let's pack that one aside. Let's assume we're dealing with just a purely unfortunate situation that the market has moved in a way that you never envisaged. So I'll come back again to what I said about the client. In this case, the client becomes the buyers, the off-plan buyers and the subscribers. Now, when developers price and they price off-plan, and you come, because I've been a part of many of these conversations too, right? And you come as a buyer and you're like, you can't be selling this thing for 500 million. How can you tell me 2-bedroom flat in VI is 500 million? And the developer is saying, look, we have factored in, pricing or everything. The contractor said, all of that. And we feel that this is a good position. And no. There's one down the road that they are finished building that is selling for 350 million. This one, you have not finished building. Why are you pricing it for 500 million? And they try to give all the explanation. Subscriber doesn't want to hear. They now, because developer too needs money, he agrees, right? But you that you are buying, you too, you are taking a risk, all right? And then when everything happens as it happens, with inflation and everything, and then the developer comes back to you and you choose to be unreasonable. And then, I'm not talking about the extreme case where it's obvious that funds were mismanaged. I'm talking about a case where, everything was done properly, but things happen. But you choose to be unreasonable. The developer says, look, let's add 10, 15%, 20% just to cover my costs so that I can exit. And you're like, no, we've signed a contract, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to EFCC. I'm going to, police. The project is going to get stuck. Everybody's going to be a loser. Because the moment law enforcement comes in, the project that you're upset that has taken 4 years, you're going to be there for 8. Because you have now brought in EFCC, they will lock the sites, they will arrest the developer. You have entered a situation where it's going to become a lose-lose. So I think we're in a situation in the market and as a country and as a people where everyone just needs to be reasonable. There's no point trying to get one over the other. The developer is a human being too. He's trying to survive. He's trying to run a business. Again, I keep on giving this disclaimer. I'm not talking about those who have, taken advantage of people and are doing the wrong thing. I'm talking about a situation where it is clear that everything was done properly, but the market just made it difficult to deliver. We all need to get in the room and become reasonable. This guy wants to finish this project. What do I do? What do I need to add? And then you have the honest conversation. It's either of two things. Can I add a little more money, Or should I say, I'm not interested, and allow this guy sell it at the current price and refund me with a little token on top, and I walk away? Or would I be patient, take some price adjustments, and allow him to finish the project? I have people who have appeared to me on a project site where they bought the site, the development 4 years before we moved to site as a contractor. So look at that. You bought it 4 years ago. I'm just moving to site, and then you show up and like, you guys, there's a contractor on site. Okay, when are you going to finish? I'm like, this project is going to take us another 4 years. And I informed the developer, and the developer asked, do they want their money back? And then I called the buyer who showed up on site. Do you want your money back? And they're like, no. We just want to be sure that, the project is going to finish. So you have two types of off-plan buyers. Those who will say, I just want my unit. And those who will say, no, refund my money. You have to be ready to have those conversations. That's just where we are right now.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because actually a friend of mine bought a unit 4 years ago, very prime location for 100 million, and it's not even completed yet. And the current value of that project, very decent location in phase one, 100 million, and the current price of that project is around 350 million now. The unit in just 4 years, and the project is 90% done, and they want to take the developer to court. I'm like, cut your loss, finish this thing, and
Actually,
take your project. Because if this guy sells it, he will give you 100 million back, right? And I think it's just like you said, being very reasonable. The market has really shifted. A project that is 4 years old, there's really nothing you want to do, because I can bet you the guy is operating at a loss, even at the moment. And anything that proves much difficult than the environment is for him, his next action will probably be to sell off the project and return your money. And obviously that's a better position for the developer than even for the client. So thank you so much. Mr. Akin, you do a lot of transactions that were off plans. How are you managing some of these conversations at the moment? So where people but because of the environment, the project cannot be fully delivered. But then the client needs their project, the client needs their property. How are you managing that conversation, and how do you think that is impacting the off-plan arrangement type sales, within the market at large?
Okay, thank you very, very much. So honestly, my heart goes out to a lot of developers and contractors. These are not easy times for everyone in the larger real estate industry. So you see, trust and credibility go a very long way. You cannot rebuild a real estate market faster than you can rebuild trust. So that is essential. So where I sit, the association that I belong to as president, I get a lot of these conversations, even in my day-to-day work. So for me, I have about maybe 4 or 5 different scenarios. And I must give a disclaimer that there's no absolute correct way. But I'll paint them all the same and give different scenarios. So scenario 1 can be maybe the top-up conversation. A developer, and you've painted an interesting scenario. A developer starts off with 10 Naira, pushes it to subscribers, and he was not able to hedge, was not able to, a lot of the interesting and creative things that Temitope mentioned, maybe due to inexperience, he wasn't able to factor in those things. Then he's caught in between. He cannot deliver. He calls a WhatsApp group, calls a meeting, puts all the subscribers there and says, hey, this is the current reality on ground. I cannot finish. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to do a top-up. It is difficult. It is frustrating. But we've seen scenarios, I've seen personally, where people just reluctantly say, okay. And I say it's tough because don't forget, I love these Subscribers have to look for hard-earned money. Some of them have taken loans. So they have to go back again to take loan to service that increase. And some of these increases, like you mentioned in your analogy, can run into millions. So these are not just slight top-ups. Hey, bring an additional 10 million or an additional 20 million. It can run into crazy sums. So it's frustrating for all parties. But we know the developer has to call this kind of gathering to show sincerity and to be transparent and carry everybody along. Maybe scenario 2 can be the slow ghost, if I may term it that. So the developer doesn't say anything. He just keeps quiet. He's confused, no experience. Subscribers, potential off-plan buyers, they go to the site. They don't see anything. They see foundation, they see skeletal works, and nothing. The developer is unreachable. Then the subscribers are wondering, is it a question of fraud, incompetence, or what could have happened? Developer just disappears. I've seen scenarios like that. Another one, which is also quite rampant, is where there's full active fraud. Yeah, the developer has taken people's money and he has gone. He's starting another project elsewhere. And they say, look, it's not my fault. It's calling everybody's bluff. These are real life scenarios. Another one, and this can be the fourth one, can be value engineering. And like I said, all these scenarios are extremely, extremely tough. Value engineering, maybe instances where the developer is supposed to deliver to time, to specification, all that is not being done. But he has delivered. So the developer uses his gumption and says, hey, I know I promised you some amenities at the rooftop, maybe it's specific to the lift. That has been communicated via an offer letter. And he says, without any communication whatsoever, he downgrades. Okay, I cannot do this quality of lift. Rather than my integrity going to stake, I would rather do a lower quality. I will just end up delivering. Or he has agreed Spanish tiles or Italian tiles. Then he goes to do local tiles. Imagine you from the receiving end, you'll be equally frustrated. But to him, his argument will be, how do you want me to manage? At least I've delivered. There maybe lastly can be the absolute worst. As Temitope has mentioned, the EFCC route. Oh yeah, now let's few subscribers come together. We've seen it happen. There are so many stories like this. And you see, it gives the industry, it gives the country a very, very bad name. We've seen the huge influx of the diaspora dollar, these large FDI inflows coming in year on year. A large tract of it is finding its way into the real estate market. But this is giving a lot of distrust. A lot of Nigerians are calling developers out. And it's not nice. EFCC too has said, hey, we are not a debt recovery agency. What is going on here? We are looking at graft and other financial crimes. Then it takes a longer route. We know the gestation period for the courts in Nigeria, 3 years to 8 years. Then everybody is in the same scenario. But off plan, if managed well with credible developers, to me, I still think it's a lovely, lovely way to acquire property from homeowners.
Thank you. And I think that's quite an exhaustive list of possible scenarios. Some of them we don't pray for, but like Mr. Tokwe mentioned, in genuine cases is to find a middle ground. Now let's look at the supply side for a little bit. Mr. Tokwe, you've spoken very exhaustively around contract management in a way that hedge contractors from the current environment. But how about situations where you've hedged yourself as a main contractor on a project, for example, but then your subcontractors, the smaller guys doing your tiling, the smaller guys doing your piling, the smaller guys doing, these other smaller scopes on your project are being impacted. How do you cascade this, your hedging, to the entire project? And does that really work on site, or are you seeing a situation where from a main contractor standpoint, high level, you are quite solid on that end, but then the smaller guys working with you, are the ones dropping the ball on the project. How are you managing those kind of situations?
So when I come in as the main contractor, I take full responsibility for everything. So I have hedged for the entire scope, not just whatever scope is within my contract. I have planned for, I have hedged, I have prepared. In most cases, even when you have smaller subcontractors providing services, I still provide the materials. So, and the materials in most of these types of contracts will probably form 70% of the cost.
Yeah.
So if I've already taken care of 70% of the cost, and I'm dealing now with an inflation within a 35%, 30, 25, maybe even 20% of the value, is within what I should be able to absorb. In an extreme situation, I would say being a contractor in the Nigerian constructions and real estate space is an extreme sport. You will get wounds. Bro, I've got wounds. I have stories for days. But you need to have staying power. I've walked away from projects with losses. That at the end of the project we made losses, but we just stayed the course. So I don't know how to say this, but it is, you win some, you lose some, right? You just have to have that mentality, and I think it's business, but I guess in construction, within our clients, is even more so. You would have some good transactions where everything goes well, goes smoothly, you make some decent margins. Then you have some where you make a loss. I have a project, I mean, years ago that I made a loss on it, but we delivered a good product. That this project was delivered, I would say 2012, 2013. It still got me a new project as recently as last month. A project that I delivered in 2012. That is what, 14 years ago. It still got me a new project last year. Still got me a new project this year. That same project, but I made a loss on that project, right? So this is what I say. Staying power. You just need to be. But we chose deliberately to not compromise on quality. And people still drive past the project and ask who did it. And imagine 14 years later, someone is giving me a project on the back of that project that I made a loss on. So you just have to have the right mentality and have a long-term view when it comes to this sector.
Thank you for mentioning that. I think it's very, that long-term view and just the staying power to stay through the phases, I think is something that is very important. And quite frankly, not everybody has it. Not everybody has that skill. Not everybody has that capacity. But obviously you've built it.
Let me say something about that, Martin, if you don't mind. So
Yeah,
it is
sure.
not, you need to have it at whatever level you are. So
You
when I
are.
say I made losses, is the right attitude, which is, look, so those losses meant that I owed suppliers that had given me materials. I owed some people, but there's nobody that I've ever owed that I will not pick your call. I'll pick your call. I will explain to you what the situation is. I'll try and give you timelines. If the timeline fails, I will call you before the day. I'll say, I know I said it will happen tomorrow, but it will. So this is what staying power is. Staying power does not necessarily mean that I have a war chest somewhere that I'm using to withstand the shocks. No, it is just being able to have those conversations. Some will go bad, some will be angry, some will call names, but because I know that I'm doing this with the utmost integrity of my heart and purpose, I'm able to stay the course and keep on showing up keep on having those conversations, keep on showing up project after project. And those same old people are still able to do business with me even till now because they saw the way I handle things. So staying power does not necessarily mean that you have, some war chest to, withstand the shocks. It just means that you are able to be honest with yourself, show up where you need to show up, and just be open with your stakeholders.
Yeah, I like that perspective, and yeah, it's definitely not that hard for everybody to start to imbibe it. So thank you so much, Mr. Shude. I'd like you to talk to us on. I mean, you have a lot of data on your platform on how services are run, and the situation that we are currently in is one that developers go and sell a very big dream to their subscribers, and when the project is delivered, a lot of the things that they sold them, for example, power will be within this kilowatt, electricity will be 24 hours daily. And a bunch of the securities, you have 12 security guards on ground, and all of the dreams that they sell are not realistic to execute, especially with the current environment. And a lot of the times, the developer have walked away. The developer sold, um, delivered the project, offloaded it, and moved on to the next thing. But now, people are on the facility managers are on your platform, the end users are on your platform. How are you managing this kind of situation where what people bought from a services standpoint is completely different from what can be realistically delivered, on site?
Great question. I want to start it by saying that developers, like any set of entrepreneurs generally are optimistic by definition. So I don't think that any developer set out to deceive, the people that he is selling stuff to. I mean, in this conversation now, I'm hearing about 4-year timelines from
Julie,
when
are you sure?
well, I can only speak for myself.
Aki said, sorry to interrupt. Aki talked about people just playing out fraud.
I actually
There's
had a
stuff like
new
that
term
now.
from him today for me, which was value engineering. That was like, I'm going to put that down and really study that, right? So, but I think that most people generally are not misrepresenting these things, because let's think about it like this. If I sold you, again, I'm not a developer, but if I sold you a house, or or the idea of a house 4 years ago, right, and you're only going to get that house this year, I think it's common sense for all of us, to acknowledge that the cost then is not the cost now of operating anything, right? So I think that these are some of the things that one wants to really keep in mind. In the last 18 months, diesel has moved from 1,300 to 1,950, going on its way to, or let me not jinx it, right? Maybe there's a way back, but I think it is fair to say that 2,000 naira per liter is where it is at, right now. Nobody could have planned that for you. Nobody could have forecasted, that for you. So the reality is the reality. The question then is, what can be done about this? I think I'd spoken previously, to communication. I think there's a communication angle to this, and also there's an education angle to this. I think that there's a responsibility on the part of the person who is building, selling, to keep people up to date with what the situation is. There's also the responsibility for those who are buying into these communities, who are going to be using them as residents, or or for shortlets or whatever, to educate themselves on what it takes actually to live and manage in one of these communities. Let me break it down a bit. So diesel costs have risen by 50%, but that doesn't mean that it is only your energy costs that will go up. Remember that you're using water in the places that we all live. That water usually has to be treated, has to be pumped, and all of that. A lot of that requires electricity. If your electricity depends on diesel, your common area costs in that environment will also go up, right? So it's really a question of modeling and of existing in reality. So many of us also unfairly try to, put the developer on the hook for what is really ultimately the resident cost, right? And let's think about it like this. I've seen scenarios where developers are essentially held hostage because, well, you sold it to us and you promised it to us at this price in the past, right? And you must keep to your word. Um, but it's that's that and usually when that happens, then what you're finding is that the developers, because maybe again they found themselves in a situation where they don't want to compromise their ability to sell more units, then provide an implicit subsidy to, and you'll find a lot of this in early new developments where occupancy has not reached the critical mass where the community has to be, self-sustaining. So these are real things that we see. I think a lot of it has to do with education and preparation, for these types of situations. But there is one part that I think that developers really need to work better on. And I think that ultimately the government really has to play a part, in these areas. And it is in the quality of buildings, especially from an energy conservation and efficiency perspective, that we are putting out there. So let me put as an example, and I'm not calling out the developer in the estate where I live, but you know, I can't operate my house without power. So things like pressure pumps running and all of those kind of things, which with a slightly different design, with a different orientation of the house, with what the Weibo people or Chinese people call feng shui, would have reduced my cost of operation. But because of the way that the place is built, I just have to spend to live there comfortably. Are there ideas, concepts, strategies that can be put in place that enable a house that essentially from the get-go, from building and designing the house, are optimizing it not for look and feel, but for energy efficiency? Because it takes maybe 4 years to churn out, the average development. But the people living in those houses are going to be living in the houses for maybe, or those houses are going to be occupied for the next half century, maybe in some cases a century. So what are we doing to make sure that the energy efficiency in these places, because in the end, all of this boils down to energy and the cost of living in them from a design perspective are taken care of and, are catered to. I think that is a big deal that nobody is thinking about. We go around, we see all these flashy buildings, lights everywhere. It is the same guy who's bought a house that has 10 chandeliers in it, 50 lights in it, who is the loudest person to scream on the estate WhatsApp group at the cost of energy and how much he's spending at the end of the month. We need to balance these two things, right? So I think that's where I'll end on that. Sorry, I've called out a number of people.
It's interesting that you met. Yeah, Mr. Tokwe, go on. You wanted to say something. Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I mean, some of us, you look at a building and you just wonder if there was any long-term thinking that went into it at all. Like, did they even think about not just the cost of running it, but even maintenance? You have a chandelier that will require to almost hire a crane to change it if it's bad. You have, just some of these things. And Mr. Tokwe, you are smiling because I think you can relate to some of these things. But it's just, what is the thought
Is
process?
Tokwe guilty of some of this?
I'm innocent.
Like, what is the thought process around? There are ways you can position a building that you can enjoy more natural lighting and not need light during the day. There is a way you, and I don't know if there's a thing with developers with tiny windows where you always need to turn on your AC. The weather is cool, but then there are walls blocking everywhere. You can't even enjoy the natural weather cooling the apartment. But you, even when it's raining, you need your AC, to be turned on. So I really wonder what is the thought process around some of these building, how things are positioned, maintenance. Do they even think about maintenance? But I think it's a much longer conversation, for us to have. So Mr. Aki, I'll just call back to you a bit. There's been a lot of changes in the environment from a macro standpoint. My question is, how is that impacting how assets are valued and priced in the market? For example, you do quite a number of valuations in this market. There is the war, there are the several layers of macroeconomic shock that has impacted the market. How is that influencing value opinion for both existing and new developments from your perspective?
Okay, so I had a feeling you're going to ask this question. So the world is changing and changing fast. I was also laughing when Trudy was mentioning a lot of these scenarios. But you see, we would learn, and we would learn the hard way. We now have a very well-informed clientele base. Information data is out there. I know of clients that are using AI tools, ChatGPT, to compare service charges, compare data across some of these projects, and they're well informed. And of course, Google is your friend. Before now, there are basically maybe about 3 or 4 major variables that most purchasers typically look at. What is the purchasing price? What is the annual rental? And of course, capital appreciation when I want to exit. Buy at X, rent at a certain figure when I want to exactly why, then sell at a different rate. But now, you see, and this, of course, as we get more and more conscious consumers, these conversations are going on now, especially with the high cost of diesel that we've mentioned here, especially even with the blockage at the Strait of Hormuz. Operating cost is a conversation that I've been having with a lot of potential buyers. And most of them, of course, is those clients from outside, those diaspora clients. But of course, we've seen a lot of these sophisticated clients here asking more and more questions. Like, what is the service charge? Who will be the one managing the property and my estate? And we know it's a major, major conversation. We've seen rents or service charges now almost trump what the rents are. It is real, it is factual, and ladies and gentlemen, it is extremely, extremely scary. The assumption that it is catastrophically wrong if we do not put some of these data in front of us. Nobody wants to be blindsided. You give a client an offer letter, whether he's leasing a property, and you tell him your service charge is X amount. Yes, we know that a lot of these facility managers actually split it, the hard and soft services, and the ones that are variable. But, not due to any direct fault of the facility manager, what the tenant or occupier had budgeted at the beginning of the year can actually ×3 or ×4, middle, halfway through, exactly halfway through its tenancy. So as we know, energy is the largest, most viable operating cost right now. Service charge too is something that we need to look at critically. But to me, I also asked, what are buyers in this market when they want to underwrite? What are things that they also look at? The operating cost reality in 2026. We've spoken about energy. We've spoken about service charges. There's something also that I like to term serviced premium. We know serviced apartments where a lot of these expatriates stay, especially in places like Banana Island. They have conversations with the grid or private PPP, IPP arrangements. Those figures are also increasing. Then most of the time, because they have a dedicated number of hours that they have power, so they don't rely much on diesel. But now the reverse is also the case, where they have blackouts, national grid stoppages and outages, then they now have to go and buy those diesel. So they're almost like a double-edged sword. They're hit on both sides. We've seen very recently, 2-3 weeks ago, this new government charges, which is extremely, extremely scary. I'm also seeing which government official I can also get more information and content on. Lagos State government has introduced revised property valuations framework. I think it just came out a few weeks ago, called the Blue Book. Market value frameworks has increased. So this would affect land use charges. This would affect even perfection rates across board. So it's not just a question of I want to buy into this particular development, whether commercial or residential. Now we need to begin to look a whole lot deeper. The world is changing. We need smarter investors. They need to wake up. And like I said, they don't need to tell a blind man that it's raining. He'll get the message. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you said that definitely all of these environment, people are caring beyond just how much is the price I'm paying, how much is the yield and how much is capital appreciation or exit price, So people are caring much deeply, especially for high-end projects. I've seen people ask who is the main contractor. They are buying because it's Dutton that built it. They're buying because it's, Elaland that built it. They are buying because it's a major notable contractor. But beyond even the contractor, I'm beginning to see conversations around who is going to manage it. And I think if it's something I would like you to touch on, does this management side of things really, is it beginning to shape buyer behavior from your perspective? Are people caring about just the building itself, but how it's run from your perspective as well, Mr. Akin? And we have a couple questions on LinkedIn, but I would just like you to touch on that a bit before we go to those.
Okay, so the quick answer to that is yes. People are searching a little bit deeper, asking more questions. I've seen if a young, which is quite interesting, female client quiz me that, look, this particular property, can we give her historical figures? What were the service charge rates? How much was used for diesel? So she said, look, it's not enough that we've told her pay a diesel deposit of 2.5 million. Those that paid 2.5 million January 2025, what did they end up paying throughout the 12 calendar months? So they are also digging deeper. And like you said, the reputation and credibility of the facility manager or developer also matters. A lot of these developers, they have what you call contracts with the homeowners, so that there's a defect liability. So that where, especially for new home purchases, where there are some defects, it doesn't emit those costs and liability doesn't pass immediately to the subscribers. There's 6 months to 8 months, depending on what the contract says, where they can easily call those contractors that, of course, are credible to come back and do some of those little snaggings. In the area of transparency, we know of facility managers that, look, on a monthly basis, some, if it is Kumba, some quarterly basis or half-yearly basis, depending on the number of units in that particular estate, or if it's a multi-tenanted residential or commercial, they share transparently what has been used and expended over time. So any variation can easily be passed on. And from that standpoint, it is easier for those people to also accept it. So some are also asking, what are the energy costs per occupied square meter per annum, and they are running the numbers. Nobody wants to put their hard-earned money into an investment that you're not 100% sure of, because very quickly that particular development, as they say, we live in a global village, we can easily get stigmatized, and people say, hey, that particular property, month on month, we don't know what the facility managers are doing. They keep on increasing, especially in small communities, the Chinese community, Lebanese community, the expatriate community. They share this information easily amongst themselves. Things like the asset energy resilience rating. These conversations are very popular even in Accra, Ghana, in Kenya. A lot of these high-rise or grade A commercial buildings, these conversations are also going on even in nice medium price apartments on the mainland and of course on the island. But it's getting the full information and knowing who is in charge of your investment.
Yeah, thank you. And that's true. People don't just even care about the building itself anymore. The long-term sustainability, because it doesn't make any sense even for a landlord. If you are looking to even rent out, you're renting a building for say 15 million per annum, and the guy who is taking it will spend almost another 15 million to pay for service charge and buy power throughout the year. It doesn't make sense, and it reduces the appeal of that asset in the eyes of end users. So we have a couple questions, and I think some of them are quite interesting. Mr. Tokwe, you can allude to some of this. So we are feeling the impact of this war this much because we are very highly reliant on imports for construction and for real estate services. That is just the truth. I don't know what the numbers are currently, but I imagine on a project that you do, you are having as much as 60% of your materials imported, depending on the grade of the project, and the specification. But somebody is asking, could this conflict accelerate localization of construction material and supply chain across Africa? And are we really prepared for it? Because this is a conversation that has been ongoing for the longest, and it seems that we are not heading there as fast as we should. So, Mr. Tokwe, I'd like to get your perspective on this. What do you think? Can this have a can this be the turning point where there's a significant shift in how we think about manufacturing locally and supporting local production, especially for the real estate and construction sector?
So the first answer to that is, as a Nigerian, as an African, of course, I would hope so. That is me being an idealist. But from a realistic point of view, we need to look at the history of how we got to where we are and how where most of our products are coming from, how they also got to where they are. Most of our products are coming from China, either directly or indirectly. I would say, without having direct data, I'm sure about 70% of our imports come in either directly or indirectly from China. When I say directly, that is we ship it straight from China to Nigeria, and indirectly, there are many products we buy from Europe that are actually produced and manufactured in China, then shipped to Europe. They put their made in whatever Italy on it, and then they ship it to us at 4 times the price. So directly or indirectly, about 70% of our imports are coming from China. Now, so go and look at how China got to where they are, and their current GDP is about $20 trillion. We have a long way to go, and this is from a position of the political will and all of that comes into creating an environment that manufacturing thrives in. You can't have a thriving manufacturing sector with power the way it is. You can't have a thriving manufacturing sector with road infrastructure and travel and rail the way it is. There's still so much to be done. So the war is just, maybe it will make us think about it more, but I personally, I don't see it achieving the kind of change and replacement localization that is required to make major change. Because I tell you what, for many things that we even have the raw materials with us here in Nigeria, it is still cheaper to ship the finished product from China than,
Why is that?
Because power is a problem, transportation is a problem. When you accumulate all the costs, it becomes too expensive to produce locally. Almost anything. The one that will shock us very soon is when we start importing gari from China. That is what that will shock you very soon, because these guys can just produce anything at scale. you find that the unit cost of producing it and shipping it down, it comes to about half the cost of most things. So we are still a long way off from being able to achieve localization, because this is about economics. If it's cheaper for me to bring it in, I'm going to find a way to bring it in. Now, the solution where we can find, we can shock the system, is for government to bring in policies that deliberately, put duties on importation of certain things that they want to focus on the local production. And, we'll give an obvious example. It is, and again, this will have an adverse effect, something like cement. So you can't import cement right now because of a deliberate policy that was put in place to increase local production of it. And that has worked. However, if you realize that right now in Nigeria, amongst our neighbors and just globally, we're probably spending more in purchasing of cement than most parts of the world, which begs the question that
Why?
if the borders are opened up for importation of something like cement, production costs of construction will probably drop, because we can import cement cheaper right now. But I agree with the localization policy. It is supposed to be temporary in terms of, the pains are supposed to be temporary. But there's also a top up to that. When you create a policy that encourages localization, then you need to create another policy that checkmates abuse of that opportunity. Because you create the opportunity for you cannot create the opportunity and just limit it. You have to then open the market so that it becomes competitive enough, so that what you are trying to achieve by creating that localization policy is achieved, because now there are many players, there's competition, and then the price can drop. But what we have right now in that particular space, I'm not sure, I think is becoming counterproductive, and I think government needs to look at it. But I think I'll stop there before I say too much.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you raised that point, because honestly, having a localization policy without the right environment will be counterproductive. Because
Yeah.
let's tell ourselves the truth. If Dangote, for example, produces cement locally at 100 naira, and he adds his 30% margin, he's going to sell at 130 naira. And that is what the Nigerian environment supports. If he produces in Ghana, for example, at 50 naira, at his 30% margin, he's selling at 65 naira. That is what the Ghana environment supports. I mean, beyond just checkmating abuse, there's also the reality of the environment, which you rightly mentioned. You can't really localize, you can't really empower local businesses. Say you've empowered local businesses without making the environment conducive for industrialization. Environment is power, environment is transportation, environment is some of these other things that are very unique to us that increases the cost. And that is why, like you said, it's cheaper to import some items from China, because unit economics that they have and the kind of environment that they have just makes it impossible for it to be expensive. It's not just possible, but we don't have that kind of scale yet. We don't even have the road infrastructure. And it's interesting you mentioned the Gary example, and it's quite scary. It's quite scary that it will be cheaper to import cassava from Africa to China, process it and bring it back, and it will be cheaper than processing it locally. It's a very, very, very scary situation. But um, I don't know. I honestly don't know where we are headed. But because of our time, we have a few more questions. Um, somebody is asking. We need to move really quite fast. Somebody is asking if so from your perspective on some projects, developers who are trying to manage the available land with high cost to build and high rise build with the expectation of their gain rather than comfortably of the occupier? Where is the role of professionals in the area of feasibility studies or the developers? So I think what I can make from this question is he's asking that developers are building from a profitability standpoint and not really the comfortability of the end users. Where does the professionals come in? Mr. Akin, do you want to touch on that? So I think this is pigging back on the conversation we had around developers just building for aesthetics, building for looks. So if they put it out there, it will look nice. Too many lights, Mr. Shude, you alluded to this. Too many lights, but they didn't think about the cost. So what do you think can be done around this? And this is what this person is asking specifically.
So sorry, let me just add. So are people buying for beauty or for personality? I think it's the same thing in marriage.
I think there is a balance of both in the market. There are people buying for beauty.
Uh, okay, good one. So, so not to put everybody in the same basket, there's the 1% of the 1% that, yes, those really shiny objects, those really expensive chandeliers, they can afford it, they can pay for it. They'll tell you this is contemporary property and this is what they want. And that's fine. But you see, the flip side is when those 1% of the 1% that are attracted by those type of products, when they want to flip, that therein lies the challenge. When they want to exit, when they put those properties in the market. And there's something interesting that I've noticed. I don't know if anybody has shared those similar thoughts. Is there are some prized assets, residential, that I'm sure of, in Ikoyi especially, that they have very poor secondary sale value. So, usually when you get into an asset, especially real estate, you look for growth areas, you buy low so that you can exit when appreciation has happened. So you've already bought a very pricey property. It is not functional, lights everywhere, high energy cost. Then, of course, that information flows around. Then it's taking you an extremely long time to be able to exit. Then when you now get prospective buyers, what they are offering is a fraction of what you paid for it. That is when it will now dawn on everybody. And you see, this also impacts on valuations. This also impacts on data. We don't have a reliable multiple listing system here like you have in Europe or in the US, where the click of a button, developers, investors can make informed decision and know even before consulting a real estate practitioner or a consultant, they have a bandwidth. Okay, 2 bedrooms on the mainland, depending on the configuration. I want to do a 2 bedrooms with 2 toilets and another one for guest convenience. It will be priced so much. It has been recently sold. And I can get those data reliably, easily online. Then I can benchmark those figures from a reliable consultant. We don't have that. So we have to rely on real estate consultants, on valuations, whether rental or sale, or from comparables. Those comparables, so we appreciate those reports that we see, the North Court report, the Ubosi, LA reports that we see out there. Those ones are doing a commendable job so that they can help benchmark. We've seen the Nigerian position as regards the GLL Transparency Index. I think 3 years ago, we're ranked about 147 countries. We pride ourselves as being a giant of Africa. Smaller countries within Africa are even higher up than us. But like I mentioned, is a two-way street. We've seen people that say, "Hey, I've commissioned my architect, and this is what I want him to build. It's not for the market; it's for me personally."
Okay, thank you. Because of our time, we will not be able to go through all of the other comments, but we will sure get answers from our moderators, our panelists, and share it with our audience on LinkedIn. So we'll take final thoughts and just wrap it up. I think we are 23 minutes behind schedule. Now, final thoughts around everything that we've spoken about the crisis and our internal macro environment is making it extremely difficult to build sustainably, is making it extremely difficult for the market to, operate the way it should and to run assets effectively. I'll start with you, Mr. Shude. From all that you are saying, what are your outlook? What is your outlook on the market from a short, mid, and long-term perspective? Especially in terms of how estates are run and what should facility managers, be doing to curb some of this in the short term.
Okay, thanks. And it's been a great conversation so far. So short term, I think is going to be painful. Not a lot of people are ready for what's coming, especially in the spikes in energy costs. I also suspect that a lot of people are still living under an implicit subsidy. Maybe some communities have built up a bit of a buffer and all of that. I know, for example, that my community where I live, we are kind of still living under some sort of subsidy based on things we had built up, in the past. So I think that once that runs out, then it will be a bit of a shock, to everyone. I think short to medium term. I think that it will ease off in the medium to long term because people will be forced to innovate. They will be forced to, kind of just take hard decisions and also become more creative, in how they deal with, many of these things that, will challenge us, especially around costs. So I see if a medium to long-term feature where communities actually aggregate and group together, especially those that are in enclaves or close to each other, and kind of look at, shared energy solutions, for example.
Yeah.
So I'm on the fence about solar at a retail level. So I don't really, talk about that too much. But personally, I see individual solar as the same as I pass my neighbor generator days, where each of us was taking care of us. Technically, it's still really expensive. One of the things that people say, I'm not the one that says that Nigerians are not really, they don't really focus on math, but when you really jump in and do the numbers, it's not really a more cost-effective solution, at least, until maybe the technology improves radically and all of that. There's a big upfront cost that we tend to ignore, right? But when you amortize that cost and you compare it with other sources, it is more expensive, actually. And I see it as a failure of communities to be able to do things together, right? Once you start falling into self-help solutions, then really, what is the basis of this community, in the end? So I think that there will be a lot of innovation. I'm looking forward to, for example, large-scale solar solutions, that can work at community level, or a way that those solutions can, be coordinated, in a community type matrix.
Yeah.
That the summary is communication for the short term so that everyone is carried along, and in the medium to long term, innovation, right? And then which is like, hey, let's go and look at other options, out there. Let's look at how we can club together to take advantage of economies of scale. Every other new development in the Lekki corridor, for example, is already a community. So how can we take advantage of those numbers to reduce our costs? That's really what community is about, And then I would again also appeal to the guys who are building these places and communities to basically look at how they can apply newer, more innovative design, ethos, so that the operational cost of the places that we live in end up cheaper. That's how I'd round it up.
Thank you, Mr. Tokwe. If you were talking to a contractor in the market on how to manage this situation and your outlook on the market in the short, mid to long term, what would be your advice?
All right. So short term, I would say it's going to be a bit challenging. and we have to, as a contractor in the space, you have to be realistic with that expectation. And the way to survive will be to ensure that you're honest about your costing, and avoid desperation, because we're in a short-term time where developers have not, and clients have not woken up to the reality of what is going on. So they are going to be still trying to get the cheapest deal. So some people are going to dive into it, and they're going to get burnt short term. Medium term, I think consolidation is the way I will put it. When the dust settles, the market will be held by the operators and the contractors who have managed, despite all the odds, to finish their projects. So as a contractor, medium term, you need to be doing everything you can within reason to ensure that you finish the projects that you are on, which goes back to the short-term one. If you know that the terms that you are getting in cannot finish the project, then avoid it. On a long-term basis, I would say that the infrastructure gaps that we have in Nigeria are immense. It doesn't matter what is happening around the world. Our population is our population. The housing gaps that we have still exist. So anyone who is in the sector, have a long-term view. That has always been my position, and that is what we continue to strive to do at Duto. Personally, have a long-term view, stay the course. The deficit in housing is there, the infrastructure gaps are there, and regardless of what is going on around the world, those will still need to be met by someone. So make sure you are in the room when that is happening.
You are saying stay alive long enough to see the dividend of the work.
Stay afloat.
Okay.
Just don't die. Just don't die.
In all you're doing, don't die.
Just stay. Stay.
Thank you so much. Mr. Aki, you intercept the buyer and the supply side of the market. And I believe you have a lot of data from what people are needing, when or what people are looking at when they are buying, or even when they are living in this apartment. What can you say from all of that data and exposure you have with both sides of the market? What can you advise developers building in this current environment to prioritize aligned with what people are looking for?
Okay. So first of all, developers should move away from the pure water syndrome, which I like to call it, where they do the typical follow. So everybody's building 2 bedrooms. There's a plethora. They feel there's a perceived demand for short-let, hospitality, Airbnb. So they're doing those types. They should deal more with research, find out from the consumer. So from people like us, clients reach out to us on a daily basis. So we understand the need. So their development should be from the market. Exactly, should be from the market standpoint. What does the market actually want? I was at a session last week, and Professor Nubi, University of Lagos, mentioned that 80% of the 20 million population of Lagos actually stays on the mainland. That was very, very fascinating to me. That is a huge, huge opportunity. Definitely, a lot of developers are moving and focusing on the high-end luxury. They're also focusing more on the island. But you see, bottom of the pyramid, the opportunities there. I also feel that short-term, of course, huge challenges when you look at the current blockage at the Strait of Hormuz, the current war, then even 2025 being a pre-election year. Naturally, we've seen it here times without number in Nigeria. That pre-election year is usually very sluggish. Real estate tends to mirror the economy. Things usually move very slowly. But despite that, the opportunities, Temitope has mentioned a few of them, the urbanization, we have the demand drivers here, youthful population, we have the urbanization rate. Yeah, we also have the housing shortage, which is not going anywhere. If developers build right, build to the market, people will definitely take it up. If I was going to advise an investor, bet on Nigeria. Those would be my final thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a very interesting conversation. And Mr. Akin, you seem to have a word for a very nice way of describing multiple things. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. This has been very, very insightful. Thank you for making the time despite the holiday. We really, really appreciate this conversation, and I'm sure that people joining us from LinkedIn, they did enjoy it as well. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the holiday and have a good one.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, it was
Thank you
nice
very
learning
much.
from you. All
Awesome.
right.
Yeah, bye
Awesome.
everyone.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Same.
Pleasure.